They say trouble doesn't knock, it barges in. But for me, it came wrapped in a dazed smile, holding a bottle of wine. When I heard the loud knock at my door at 2 a.m., my heart leapt into my throat. My first thought was burglars. Who else would pound so insistently in the dead of night? I crept to the peephole, my breath shallow, and there he was, Lucas, my newly moved-in neighbor, looking like a man barely holding himself together. He wasn't what I'd call an open book. Handsome in that tousled, brooding way, Lucas had the air of someone carrying more baggage than he could handle. His deep blue eyes usually hinted at charm, but tonight they pleaded for something else entirely. Help? Forgiveness? It was hard to tell. "Emma, I'm sorry to disturb you," he began awkwardly when I opened the door just a crack. My chain still latched. I couldn't sit in that apartment any longer. It's suffocating. For the next few moments, I couldn't move. My eyes locked on the photo, my mind racing to piece together the terrifying puzzle. Who had taken this picture? More importantly, who was behind this twisted warning? I grabbed the envelope, shaking with anger and fear, and rushed to my front door. The hallway was empty, silent except for the faint hum of a neighbor's TV. Whoever had broken the window was already gone. My gut told me this wasn't some random act. It was deliberate. Personal. The photo confirmed it. I wasn't just caught in someone else's drama. I was being dragged under. The following morning, I called Lucas. No answer. Again. By now, I was growing tired of his disappearing act. If anyone had answers, it was him. But every call went straight to voicemail. Frustrated, I decided to march over to his apartment. When I got there, his door was slightly ajar. "Lucas?" I called out hesitantly, pushing the door wider. The apartment was eerily quiet, the air heavy with the smell of stale wine and old coffee. It looked like it had been ransacked. Cushions overturned, papers scattered, the contents of drawers spilled onto the floor. And Lucas? Gone. On the coffee table, amidst the chaos, sat a small, black journal. Its pages were filled with frantic scribbles, half-finished sentences, doodles, and names circled repeatedly. One name stood out, Claire. Underneath it, an address I didn't recognize was written in bold letters. That was when I noticed something else, a faint buzzing sound. It was coming from his bedroom. I followed the noise, my heart pounding with each step. His phone lay on the nightstand, vibrating with an incoming call. The screen displayed a name, unknown caller. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Lucas," a woman's voice demanded, sharp and accusatory. "This is Emma," I said cautiously. "Who is this?" There was a pause, then a soft, humorless laugh. "Oh, Emma, the other woman. How quaint. I've been meaning to speak with you." "Who is this?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You'll find out soon enough," she said cryptically before hanging up. I left Lucas's apartment feeling more unsettled than ever. The address in the journal burned in my mind. I decided to find out where it led. Later that evening, I arrived at an upscale townhouse across town. The place was immaculate, nothing like the chaos I'd just left behind. I rang the doorbell, rehearsing a story about a lost package in case I was confronted by someone who didn't know Lucas. But when the door opened, I was faced with Claire herself. She was stunning, the kind of woman who made you feel inferior just by existing. Her icy blue eyes assessed me quickly, and then she smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, if it isn't the homewrecker," she said sweetly, leaning against the doorframe. "I wondered how long it would take you to show up." Her words stung, but I refused to flinch. "I'm not here to fight with you, Claire. I just want to know what's going on." She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "What's going on?" "Oh, you mean Lucas's little disappearing act? Or maybe the threats you've been receiving?" Her voice dripped with mock concern. "You know about the threats?" I asked sharply. Claire's expression darkened. "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into, do you? Lucas didn't tell you anything about his extracurricular activities?" "Like what?" I pressed. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Lucas owes money to some very dangerous people. People who don't just threaten, they act. And when they can't find him, they go after the next best thing. That's you, sweetheart. My blood ran cold. I wanted to deny it, to call her a liar, but the evidence was piling up. The photo, the threats, the strange man lurking near my building. It all fit. You're lying, I said weakly. Her smirk returned. Believe what you want, but if I were you, I'd start watching my back. She shut the door before I could say another word. When I got home, my apartment felt more like a trap than a refuge. Every sound outside my window made me jump. Every shadow seemed like it could be hiding something sinister. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. On the third night, I decided to act. If Lucas had really gotten involved with criminals, then I needed to find him and put an end to this. I went back to his apartment, hoping for any clue I might have missed. This time, the journal wasn't on the coffee table where I'd left it. Instead, there was a single slip of paper with an address scribbled on it, different from the one I'd already visited. Below it, in Lucas's handwriting, were 2 words, "Help me." I hesitated, debating whether to call the police. But something told me this wasn't a situation where they could help. If Lucas was in trouble, I had to find him myself. The address led me to a seedy motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that reeked of cigarette smoke and desperation. I found the room number written on the note and knocked softly. "Lucas?" I called. The door creaked open, but no one answered. I stepped inside, my breath hitching as I took in the scene. Lucas was there, slumped in a chair with his hands tied behind his back and a gag in his mouth. His face was bruised, his shirt torn. Before I could move, the door slammed shut behind me. I spun around to find myself face to face with a man in a black ski mask, a gun in his hand. "Welcome to the party," he said, his voice laced with malice. To be continued. There was a desperation in his voice that pierced through my skepticism. Against better judgment, I undid the chain and let him in. My living room, with its thrift store decor and candles on every surface, felt like a sanctuary for his restless energy. He sank into my couch, shoulders slumped as if he'd carried a boulder upstairs. The bottle of wine he brought clinked as he set it on the coffee table. "I had a fight with my wife," he confessed, his words spilling out like an overdue confession. "She left me a week ago. I'm falling apart." For hours we talked, or rather, he talked and I listened. He recounted the unraveling of his marriage in painful detail, his voice hoarse but steady. The wine flowed, as did his emotions. I should have sent him home, drawn boundaries. But there was something magnetic about his vulnerability, his raw honesty in the dim light of my living room. Before I realized it, the distance between us on the couch had vanished. And then, he kissed me. It was impulsive, reckless, and wrong. But it was the kind of wrong that electrified my nerves. For a fleeting moment, I let myself get swept away. When we pulled back, his hand lingered on my thigh, and I knew we'd crossed a line neither of us could redraw. The next morning, reality hit like a freight train. I avoided Lucas's calls, but there was no avoiding the note pinned to my door when I returned from work. "I know everything. You will regret this." The handwriting was delicate but threatening, and it chilled me to the bone. The obvious culprit? Lucas's wife. But when I confronted Lucas, his expression morphed from confusion to outright fear. "It's not her," he said quietly, glancing over his shoulder as if someone might be watching. "I haven't told you everything, Emma." As it turned out, Lucas's wife, Claire, had secrets of her own. Secrets that involved someone who might have been far too interested in Lucas's life, even now. His cryptic explanation only deepened my unease, and I was left to untangle the web of threats on my own. The following days were chaos. A man in a gray hoodie loitered near my building every evening, his head down but his presence unmistakable. My car tires were slashed one night, leaving me stranded. And Lucas, the only person who could explain what was happening, had gone radio silent. Then, one night, I woke up to a sound more chilling than the 2 a.m. knock, the shattering of my living room window. The wine bottle Lucas had brought me lay shattered on the floor, its dark red liquid spreading like blood. In its place, on the coffee table, was a single black envelope with my name scrawled on it. Inside was a photograph of Lucas and me, kissing on my couch. The back of the photograph had a message written in bold, black ink. "This is just the beginning. To be continued. Don't scream," the man in the ski mask warned, his voice cold and steady. The gun in his hand wasn't shaking, and I knew immediately that this was someone who'd used one before. My instinct screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. "What do you want?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he motioned with the gun for me to sit on the edge of the bed. I obeyed, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure Lucas could hear it. The man circled the room slowly, his dark eyes scanning me with disinterest. "You made a mistake coming here," he said finally, his tone matter-of-fact. "Lucas here has debts he can't pay, and now you're caught in the middle." "Please," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'm not involved in any of this. I just want to help him." The man chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "Help him? Sweetheart, Lucas isn't the victim you think he is. He's a liar, a thief, and a coward. You're just the latest collateral damage." I glanced at Lucas, who was squirming against the ropes binding him to the chair. His muffled protests grew louder, and the man turned sharply, silencing him with a glare. "Shut up, Lucas," he barked. Then, to me, he added, "Did he tell you what he did to Claire?" My stomach twisted. "What are you talking about?" The man pulled a chair from the corner of the room and sat down in front of me, his posture deceptively relaxed. Claire wasn't just some scorned wife. She was his partner. They ran scams together, robbing people blind. When she wanted out, Lucas didn't take it well. "That's not true," I blurted, though doubt was already creeping in. Claire said what?" The man cut me off. "That she left because of a fight? She's been lying to you just like Lucas has. She didn't leave him. He tried to get rid of her." I shook my head, refusing to believe it. But the man wasn't done. "She found out he was skimming from their last mark, pocketing cash she didn't know about. When she confronted him, he pushed her down a flight of stairs, nearly killed her." "No," I whispered, the room spinning around me. "Ask him," the man said, pointing the gun at Lucas. "Go on. See what he says." I turned to Lucas, my hands trembling. His eyes met mine, wide and pleading, but he said nothing. The truth hung heavy in the air, and I felt sick. The man stood, pacing now as he continued. "Claire's alive, but barely. She's in hiding, which means I get the pleasure of cleaning up Lucas's mess. Starting with you." "Wait," I shouted, panic taking over. "I'll leave. I won't say anything to anyone, I swear." The man smirked. "That's cute, but you're already in too deep." He raised the gun, and for a moment, I thought this was it. But instead of pulling the trigger, he stepped forward and used it to push me back onto the bed. "Tie her up," he ordered Lucas. Lucas shook his head furiously, his muffled protests growing more frantic. The man sighed and rolled his eyes before turning to me. "You do it, or I do it. And if I do it, she doesn't walk out of here. Understand?" Tears blurred my vision as Lucas hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. The man cut the ropes around his wrists, but kept the gun trained on both of us. Lucas moved toward me, his hands shaking as he picked up a length of rope from the floor. "Lucas," I said softly, desperate to reach him. "You don't have to do this. We can figure something out." But he avoided my gaze, his face pale with guilt. He tied my wrists loosely, the ropes barely holding. The man didn't seem to notice or care. He was too busy rummaging through Lucas's things, muttering to himself. "This is a waste of time," the man finally growled. He pulled out a burner phone and typed a message before turning back to us. "We're leaving. Both of you. Where are you taking us?" I demanded, fear lacing my voice. "You'll see," he said with a chilling grin. The next thing I knew, we were shoved into the back of a van. My hands were still bound, but I could feel how loose the ropes were. Lucas sat beside me, his head hanging low, the weight of his secrets written all over his face. "Is it true?" I whispered when the van started moving. "What he said about Claire?" Lucas didn't respond at first. Then, in a voice so quiet I could barely hear it, he said, "I didn't mean to hurt her. It was an accident." Rage bubbled up inside me. "You lied to me. You dragged me into this nightmare, and for what? Your lies? Your greed?" He finally looked at me, his eyes glistening with tears. "I didn't know this would happen. I swear, Emma, I didn't know." I wanted to scream, to lash out, but the van hit a bump, jostling us both. That's when I felt it. Something hard and metallic tucked under the seat. My fingers grazed it, and my heart leapt. A crowbar. I glanced at the driver, a second man I hadn't seen before, then back at Lucas. "If we're getting out of this, you need to help me," I whispered. He hesitated, then gave a barely perceptible nod. The van screeched to a halt moments later, and the masked man opened the back doors. "Out!" he barked, waving the gun at us. As Lucas climbed out first, I made my move. Gripping the crowbar, I swung it as hard as I could, aiming for the man's wrist. The gun flew from his hand as he stumbled back, shouting in pain. "Run!" I screamed at Lucas, but he froze, his eyes darting between me and the gun on the ground. The masked man recovered quickly, lunging for the weapon. I swung the crowbar again, but this time he dodged, grabbing my arm and twisting it painfully. The crowbar clattered to the ground, and I fell with it, gasping in pain. Lucas finally moved toward the gun. To be continued. Lucas's hand trembled as he reached for the gun. The masked man, realizing the shift in control, froze momentarily. His dark eyes flicked between Lucas and me, calculating his next move. The tension was electric, the air thick with the unspoken question. Would Lucas pull the trigger? But Lucas didn't aim the gun at the masked man. Instead, he pointed it at me. "Lucas," I whispered, my voice shaking. "What are you doing?" "Stay down," he barked, his voice cracking. The mask of fear and guilt he'd worn until now melted away, revealing something colder. "This isn't how I wanted it to go, Emma, but you should have just stayed out of it." "What the hell are you doing, Lucas?" the masked man snapped, clearly as surprised as I was. "She's not part of the deal." "Neither were you," Lucas shot back. "But here we are." The next moments blurred together. Lucas kept the gun trained on me as he forced the masked man to tie me up again, this time so tightly that my wrists burned. The crowbar lay just out of my reach, mocking me with its uselessness. "This doesn't make any sense," I shouted, struggling against the ropes. "What is this, Lucas? What do you want?" "Money," he said flatly. "It's always been about the money." My mind reeled. Money? After everything, it came down to that? But even as he said it, something about his tone felt off. He wasn't telling me everything. The masked man glared at him. "You think you can just walk out of this? The people you owe won't stop because you pulled a gun, Lucas." Lucas smirked, a chilling expression I'd never seen on him before. "That's the beauty of it. I'm not walking out of this. I'm running, with a bargaining chip." He nodded toward me, and the realization hit like a punch to the gut. I wasn't just a loose end to tie up, I was leverage. For what? I didn't yet understand. Hours later, we were deep in the woods, miles from the motel. The van had been abandoned, and Lucas marched me and the masked man toward a decrepit cabin that looked like it hadn't seen human life in decades. My legs ached, and every step felt like it might be my last. The cabin's interior was no better. Rotting floorboards, shattered windows, and the stench of mildew. Lucas shoved me onto a rickety chair, tying my legs to its wooden frame. The masked man, now unarmed and bound himself, glared at Lucas with pure hatred. "You're making a big mistake," the masked man hissed. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Lucas laughed bitterly. "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. That's why I'm not leaving here empty-handed." "Is Claire part of this?" I demanded, my anger outweighing my fear. "Did she help you plan this?" Lucas's expression darkened. "Claire's gone. She's been gone since that night." "What night?" I pressed. What happened? She wasn't supposed to get hurt, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, the cocky facade cracked, and I saw the guilt beneath it. But she found out about the offshore accounts. The stolen money. Everything. I panicked. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Claire hadn't just left him. He'd made sure she couldn't. You killed her, I said, the words tasting like bile. He didn't deny it. The masked man broke the silence with a bitter laugh. You think you're walking out of here with your stolen money? The people who hired me, they won't stop hunting you. They'll find you, Lucas. And when they do, you'll wish I'd put a bullet in you myself. Not if I find them first, Lucas said, his smirk returning. And you're going to help me. You're insane, the masked man spat. Lucas shrugged. Maybe, but I've come this far, haven't I? The hours dragged on, the tension in the cabin so thick it was suffocating. I kept glancing at the ropes around my wrists, silently willing them to loosen. Lucas, distracted by his own schemes, didn't notice when one of the knots started to give. Finally, an opportunity came. Lucas stepped outside to make a call, leaving the gun on the table. The masked man's eyes met mine, a silent agreement passing between us. Whatever his motives were, he clearly wanted Lucas gone as much as I did. I strained against the ropes, ignoring the pain as the fibers dug into my skin. The knot gave way just as Lucas's shadow fell across the doorway. Without thinking, I lunged for the gun. Emma, don't! Lucas shouted, rushing toward me. But I was faster. The cold weight of the gun in my hand steadied me, and I pointed it at him, my hands shaking but my aim steady enough. Step back, I warned. He hesitated, his eyes darting to the masked man, who had somehow freed himself from his bonds. The man stood, his expression unreadable. What now? Lucas asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. You going to shoot me, Emma? Is that who you are? I didn't answer. My mind raced, torn between fear and fury. Before I could decide, the masked man lunged forward, tackling Lucas to the ground. The gun flew from my hands, skidding across the floor. Run! The masked man shouted at me as he grappled with Lucas. I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted out of the cabin, the sounds of their struggle echoing behind me. Branches clawed at my skin as I ran through the woods, desperate to put as much distance between me and that nightmare as possible. When I finally stumbled onto a road, gasping for air, headlights blinded me. A car screeched to a halt, and a man stepped out, his face hidden by the glare. Emma, he called. It was Claire. To be continued. Claire. I gasped, stumbling toward the car, my legs barely able to hold me upright. My mind reeled. Claire wasn't just alive. She was standing right in front of me, her icy blue eyes cutting through the darkness. Yes, it's me, she said, her voice calm but edged with urgency. Get in. Now. I didn't argue. My body moved on autopilot, collapsing into the passenger seat. She slammed the door behind me and sped off, her hands gripping the wheel with white-knuckled intensity. You're alive, I stammered, the words tumbling out as my brain tried to catch up. Lucas told me. He said you were gone. Claire laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. Lucas says a lot of things. None of them are true. I tried to process what she was saying, but the adrenaline coursing through me made it nearly impossible to focus. He said you found out about the money. That he tried to kill me, she interrupted, her jaw tightening. He did. But Lucas underestimated just how much I've learned about survival. And now, he's underestimated you. Her words hung heavy in the air, and for the first time, I felt the weight of what I'd just escaped. He's back there, I said suddenly, panic flaring in my chest. With the masked man. We have to call the police. No, Claire said sharply. Not yet. What do you mean, not yet? I demanded. They'll kill each other, and if they don't, Lucas will come after us. Claire didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed on the road, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. Lucas doesn't deserve to walk away from this. And the man in the mask? He's not your enemy, Emma. He's mine. Claire pulled into a secluded parking lot and cut the engine. She turned to face me, her demeanor shifting from cold determination to something softer, almost maternal. I need you to tell me everything, she said. From the beginning. I hesitated, unsure if I could trust her. But what choice did I have? Over the next 10 minutes, I recounted everything. The late-night knock at my door, the wine, the threats, and the chaos that followed. When I finished, Claire sat back, exhaling slowly. He hasn't changed, she muttered, mostly to herself. What do you mean? I asked. Claire's gaze locked onto mine. Lucas has always been a parasite. He finds people, women, mostly, and convinces them he's harmless. Then he takes everything he can. Money, trust, love. When he's done, he leaves them broken. Or worse. A chill ran down my spine. And you? She smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. I was his perfect mark, ambitious but naive. He saw my hunger for success and used it against me. By the time I realized what he really was, we were already married. And then came the scams. So it's true? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. You were his partner? At first, she admitted. But I got out. Or tried to. When I told him I was done, he snapped. He pushed me down the stairs and left me for dead. That's when I realized the only way to stop Lucas was to beat him at his own game. Before I could ask what she meant, Claire's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her expression hardening. They're on the move, she said, starting the car again. They? I asked, my confusion mounting. Claire gave me a sidelong glance. You didn't think I came alone, did you? We drove in tense silence until we reached a deserted warehouse on the outskirts of town. Claire parked behind a row of black SUVs, and I noticed several men in tactical gear milling around the entrance. Who are they? I asked nervously. Allies, she said simply. Lucas has enemies, Emma. Powerful ones. And I've been working with them to make sure he can never hurt anyone again. What are you talking about? I demanded, my fear bubbling to the surface. You're setting him up? What about the law? The police? Claire laughed again, that same bitter edge returning. The law? The police? Do you really think they care about women like us? About the lives Lucas has destroyed? No, Emma. This is justice. Inside the warehouse, the air was thick with tension. Lucas and the masked man were both restrained, seated on opposite sides of the room. Lucas's face was bloodied, his bravado replaced with raw panic. The masked man, on the other hand, looked almost bored, as if he'd been through this before. Claire strode in, commanding the room with an ease that startled me. She stopped in front of Lucas, her lips curling into a cold smile. Hello, darling, she said mockingly. Long time no see. Lucas glared at her, his voice hoarse. You think you're going to get away with this? Oh, I'm not just going to get away with it, she replied, leaning in closer. I'm going to win. What followed was a whirlwind of revelations. Claire had orchestrated everything. The threats, the masked man's involvement, even Lucas's capture. She'd spent years building a network of allies. People Lucas had wronged, people who wanted to see him pay. And now, it was all coming to a head. Emma, Claire said, turning to me, you have a choice. You can walk away from this and never look back. Or you can stay and see how it ends. I hesitated, every instinct telling me to leave. But something kept me rooted in place. Maybe it was the need for closure. Or maybe it was the burning desire to see Lucas finally face the consequences of his actions. I'm staying, I said firmly. Claire nodded, a flicker of approval in her eyes. Good. The next few hours passed in a blur. Claire's allies extracted confessions, gathered evidence, and dismantled Lucas's web of lies piece by piece. By the end of it, Lucas was a shadow of the man who had knocked on my door that fateful night. When it was over, Claire handed me an envelope. This is for you, she said. A small compensation for everything you've been through. I opened it to find a plane ticket and a note. Start fresh. Somewhere far away. Tears welled in my eyes as I looked at her. What about you? Claire smiled faintly. Don't worry about me. I'm right where I need to be. As I boarded the plane the next day, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. My life would never be the same, but maybe that was a good thing. I glanced out the window as the plane took off, wondering if I'd ever see Claire again, or if she'd fade into the shadows, just like Lucas had. One thing was certain, I'd never forget her, or the night she saved my life. And so, the story ends. But perhaps, for Emma and Claire, it's only the beginning.